Hi, and welcome to 2.2 Oblique Pictorials. We're going to start talking about pictorial drawings, which are just 2D illustrations of a 3D objects, and they all show three faces of an object in one view. They provide a realistic view of an object, and there are three types. In this lesson, we'll do two types of obliques, Cavalier and cabinet. Then in the next lesson, we'll do isometric, and then after that, we'll do perspective. Pause the video, compare and contrast these, and keep in mind, these are representing the same exact object, even though it might look slightly different. So pause the video and see what you can see about the differences and the similarities. So for the oblique, you might notice both of these have a flat front face, and the isometric comes at an angle. So that's like the main difference with those, is the isometric is drawn at an angle like this, where the oblique has a flat front face, kind of like that. And the perspective drawings, what's the difference between this one probably looks closest to this. What's the difference between those two drawings? In this one, the lines are all parallel to each other as they go back. But in the perspective, I don't know if it's hard to make out, but they kind of all converge at a vanishing point way in the background in an effort to show how in reality things that are further away get smaller. And that's kind of why the lines aren't all parallel to each other, is because the further back you go, the smaller they appear. Whereas in this one, it doesn't happen like that. So that's just a brief overview of the three different types of pictorials. So we'll start by talking about oblique pictorials. An oblique pictorial starts with a straight-on view of one of the object's faces, which is often the front face. And you have to pick the front face carefully. And angled parallel lines are drawn to one side to represent the object's depth. Common oblique angles include 30, 45, and 60 degrees. In this class, we typically always do 45 degrees. So if this is what you're trying to represent, and this is kind of shown in isometric because it's angled, how would it look in oblique? It would look, see how this is flat as opposed to angled? Okay, so it would look something like that, and these lines are coming back 45 degrees. And you might have drawn something like this in the margins of your notebook before, if you ever drew like this 3D box type of thing. That's technically an oblique pictorial because the front face is flat, like that. So there are two different types of oblique pictorials. There's Cavalier and cabinet. The difference between the two is how the depth of the object is represented. So this is a Cavalier, and in a cabinet, it looks like that. The depth isn't as long, so this is a shorter depth than this one. So for Cavalier, you always want to do the full depth. The object appears deeper than it actually is, so it makes your drawings look kind of distorted and really stretched out. To make them look more realistic, you use cabinet and you do half the depth. So it's a more realistic view because the depth does not appear distorted. So what does this mean exactly? If you're, think of a piece of grid paper, okay? And if this line is 2 grid spaces tall, and then this line is 2 grid spaces tall, you would go back diagonally through 2 full grid spaces. So it would look something like this. There are your grid lines, and you go back 1, 2, if it was a 2 by 2 by 2 cube. Similarly, if you would make this 1, 2, 1, 2, but now you only go back 1 grid space. So if there's your grid paper and you want to make a 2 by 2 by 2 cube, yeah, you did 2 over here, 2 over here, but now you're going to kind of break the rule and only do 1 because you're going half the depth. And even though you only go back 1 in your sketch, it ends up looking more like a cube than the Cavalier. The Cavalier looks like it should be a rectangular prism, but really you're trying to represent a cube by going back the full 1, 2, 1, 2, and then 1, 2, but it makes it look super stretched out. So that's kind of the difference. So I'm going to go through this PowerPoint project lead the way I put this out. In another video, I'll do the sketch and you could kind of follow along with me. So just watch the procedure as we go through the glass box. The glass box method is going to pop up. This method will be used for all three pictorials, oblique, isometric, and perspective. It's very useful for drawing these. I know you could probably try to do it freehand without this method, but I want it's required. You have to draw these construction lines. I want to see your glass box, and don't erase away the glass box, because I want to make sure you're practicing this method. We're teaching you a new method for doing this sketching, and if you just try to do it in your own way, you're not doing the lesson. So you have to do the glass box method for all of these. It's required. It says start by imagining a glass box that encloses the entire object as shown by the red lines. So here's what it looks like. And again, I'll make another video that I think is better than this, but this is just an overview of what the process is, the glass box method. Sketch a rectangle to represent the overall height and width of the box, such that the height lines are vertical and the width lines are horizontal. This will give a straight-on view of the front of the object. And by the way, this is always the front view on this side of the square. This is always the top view. And this is always the right side. So that's kind of like the standard. This is the front, where it's like, looks like, and if it's an isometric, it's like on the left side, and this is on the right side, and this is the top, this is the front. Okay, so they're saying start by drawing the front view as a rectangle with the height and the width. So that's the overall width. And let's try to figure out what scale they're using. So I see 2 cubes here. So 2 cubes they're representing as 4 grid lines long. So that means each cube is a 2 by 2 square. That's how they're representing it. And the overall height is 1, 2, 3 cubes. So how many grid lines tall would you make that? Did they do it right? 1, 2, 3 cubes is 6 grid lines. So that's good. So that's the overall height and width of our glass box. And then you just continue drawing the glass box like you have done in the past, I'm sure, in your margins. You're going to draw the depth now. So it says complete the box by sketching the depth lines to the overall depth of the object at a given angle, 45 degrees. So this is 1 cube deep. And if 1 cube is equal to 2 grid lines, and we're drawing a Cavalier, they should go back 2 grid lines. Let's see what they do. See, this is why I don't really like the PowerPoint, because it gets all distorted. Really, they should have went back. Did you predict they would go back here and then here? This is truly what we call the Cavalier in this class, to go back this far. But they were like, oh, the Cavalier looks so crazy because it's so deep anyway, so they made it shorter than it had to be for a Cavalier. But that's kind of how it works. Okay, so now you have a nice glass box. And you're using, the red lines are construction lines, very light construction lines. We're not drawing object lines yet. The cabinet oblique. The cabinet is drawn half the depth. So they're doing 2 drawings at the same time here. Okay, and hopefully you can kind of think in the future, which one do you think is going to look better, represent this better? Isn't this look like it's going to be a little bit too deep, and this one looks kind of more accurate? I think so. All right, so the next step is, once you have your glass box, you draw where the object touches the box. So starting with the front, it says sketch points and construction lines to identify the edges of the box faces that occur on the visible surfaces of the box. So they're going to draw that L shape. Just like that. They're going to do the same for the cabinet. Oh no, they're going to go deep now. And then on this face, over here. Okay. And now it says use object lines to trace over the construction lines to delineate the edges of the box of the faces that occur on the visible surfaces of the box. So once you have it all set up with your construction lines, it's like you're building the sketch with the construction lines. And now you know exactly where the object lines are supposed to go, and you don't have to guess and be artistic. It's all like kind of mathematical. All right, so it says sketch additional construction lines to identify edges of the object inside the box. So you drew the box, you drew where the object touches the box. Now we have to draw what's inside the box over here. So you draw going back, and then you drop a line right there, and then you drop a line across, and where they intersect, that should match up if you did it correctly. Trace over the construction lines with object lines to delineate the remaining object lines. Create the oblique cabinet view. Similarly, use tonal shading. This is required to enhance the appearance of the perspective sketch and create a more realistic representation. Tonal shading means there's 3 different tones. Dark, darkest. Well, I would say this is like light, then medium, then dark. So there's 3 different tones because there's 3 different faces. And anything that's in the front, you could use the dark. Anything that's in the top, even this is like facing the top direction, you could use the light. And then anything facing the right side, you could use the medium. And that's kind of how the convention works in this class. That's what we'll do. Front is the darkest, top is the lightest, and then the right side is the mediumest. These are examples of what you can use oblique pictorials to sketch. So these are, you can see they're flat on the bottom, but it doesn't have to be cube like that. You could still do the same thing and then just draw the depth going back. And that's an oblique pictorial. But for your assignment, we're not going to do anything crazy like that. We're going to continue doing these like cube shapes. So why not use Tetris shapes? It says draw the Tetris shapes in oblique, cabinet, and Cavalier. There are 5 different shapes, so you should have 10 pictorials total because you have to do cabinet and Cavalier, cabinet and Cavalier, cabinet, Cavalier, cabinet and Cavalier, cabinet and Cavalier. So 10 total. Submit an image of your pictorials to 2.2 oblique pictorials. Now there's some rules that you have to follow. Choose the correct front view for each shape. So the way this is oriented has to be done. This L shape has to be on its side like that. And this T shape, don't make it a T. Make it the T like upside down like that. And then the Z shape looks like that. I guess it looks more like an S than a Z. All right, but that's the correct front view. The Z shape you could do either way, but we'll talk about what makes a good front view a little bit later when we do dimensioning. It says use a ruler or straight edge to draw straight lines. I don't care how good you think you are at drawing lines. I want you to use a ruler, or maybe if you don't have a ruler, the side of a folder or another straight object to draw straight lines. I don't want to see wobbly lines. It's got to look nice, professional. Use tonal shading for all your finished sketches. So you need to do tonal shading 10 times. And do not include the lines to make the parts look like multiple squares. So I don't want to see these. Do not draw these lines. Make it look like one continuous object. Don't draw these lines. If you draw these lines, you're going to get points off. The reason being is because I want to make sure that your drawing looks nice and you're only using the object lines where necessary. Object lines here, like that. Okay, don't draw the lines that are inside, otherwise your drawings will look a little bit messy. So on the next slides, I have what these shapes look like. The square shape. See how nice this looks without all these crazy lines in the middle? I don't want to see that. Now this is really it's perspective or an isometric, so this isn't what you want to draw. But I wanted to show you what the depth looked like. So only go back 1 square. If this is a 2 by 2 square, only go back 1. Okay, don't go, it's not a cube, it's a square shape. These all have a depth of 1 space because you can't see the depth over here. So that's the depth. And that's the front view. This is the front view. Okay, so these are all showing the front view. Sketch a cabinet and Cavalier. Do not draw the lines for each individual square. So all these, you could pause the video and do your sketch here if you would like. There's also the I shape. Again, don't draw these lines. Make it look like a continuous shape. This is to show you that it's 4 long and 1 deep. Here's the L shape. Make sure that you're drawing it with the correct front view. Should look like this, and then you go deep, 1 deep. This is the T shape. Again, use this front view shown here, and then go deep. And then the Z shape, use this front view, and then do the cabinet and the Cavalier. So once you've drawn all 10 pictorials, 2 for each, then you could submit it to that assignment. Remember to use a ruler. Remember to use tonal shading. All right, don't draw those lines in between. And you have to use the glass box method. You have to use the glass box method. Thanks for watching and have a great day.